Hey, hi, hello. Welcome back to the Weekly Trump Date, where we go through this week's top stories regarding the Trump administration and the US government. I'm your host, Gerardo Sosa, and this week we saw things like talks of Trump running for a third term, the longest Senate speech in US history, Liberation Day with Trump's new tariffs, and updates on global news. Starting off with the economy. Last Friday, Trump said he spoke with Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, and they said it was a productive call, but Canada was still threatening to fight back against any new tariffs from the US. On Sunday on Air Force One, Trump told reporters that the tariffs are going to impact all nations and that they're going to be more generous than the countries were to us. Quote, they've ripped us off like no country's ripped us off in history. Here's a little refresher on what's already happened. On February 4th, 25% tariffs were promised on Canada and Mexico and 10% on China, but were cancelled on Canada and Mexico. A month later, on March 3rd, that 10% was raised to 20% on China, and those original tariffs on Canada and Mexico were put into place. That same day, Canada placed 25% retaliatory tariffs on $30 billion of goods imported from the US. And on March 6th, Trump postponed those 25% tariffs on a lot of products from Mexico and some from Canada, creating Scheinbaum, making progress on border security and drug smuggling. On March 10th, China's retaliatory tariffs on chicken, pork, soybeans, and beef took effect as their second round of tariffs after the first on oil and coal. And on the 12th, Trump placed a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum. The next day, on the 13th, Canada hit the US with their second round of tariffs on things like smartphones, game consoles, and umbrellas. On Tuesday, we heard a Canadian parts manufacturer say that for the same part that he sells an American automaker like General Motors, it'll get tariffed 25% 4 times because that's how many times it crosses the border. There was a lot of nervousness from Republicans on Capitol Hill, Chairman Thompson being one of them, already asking the White House for exemptions on products that are important to the agriculture industry. At 8 p.m. Eastern, we saw Senator Cory Booker break the record for the longest Senate speech in US history after speaking for a little over 25 hours, including some talks about the tariffs. This shows one of the ways that Democrats can fight back against the administration, which is the kind of fight that the party was looking for after the decision to back the bill that avoided a government shutdown 3 weeks ago. We also saw US stocks close its worst quarter since 2022. On Wednesday morning, the White House secretary said that they're not going to be wrong and that they're going to work because Trump has a brilliant team of advisors that have been studying these issues for decades. This came after the White House trade team was undecided until late the night before, trying to nail down exactly what they were going to roll out. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro estimated that these tariffs would net our economy about $600 to $700 billion a year. In the afternoon, Trump announced the tariffs using a chart which showed the tariffs already charged to the US and the reciprocal tariffs that he was going to implement with a 10% base on all imported goods to the US. Trump said that these reciprocal tariffs were not full and were kind based on a formula that the White House used, which looks at the trade deficits that we have with these countries that basically halves their tariffs. If we were importing more things from them than they were from us, he gave them a smaller tariff. The second set of tariffs he implemented varied by country, but some of the highest being St. Pierre, Miquelon, and Lesotho 50%, Cambodia 49%, Laos 48%, Madagascar 47%, Vietnam 46%, Myanmar and Sri Lanka 44%, Falkland Islands and Syria 41%. The gains from trade used to be something that both sides could agree on, and now you have Trump shattering the idea of the new world economic order that's been building up for the past 40 years in just one day. Again, the reasoning being to increase manufacturing and jobs in the US, but it's not easy to just turn around and open or reopen manufacturing plants in just a couple months. We saw a lot of countries react strongly after the announcement. The European Union called the tariffs a major blow to the world economy, and China said it's already preparing countermeasures. China's total tariff rate was 54%, which really impacts trade between the US and China, which are the two largest economies in the world. These tariffs have basically undone the working relationship that we've built throughout the years. We get things like clothes, electronics, laptops, smartphones, and even game consoles from China. The Senate also passed a measure to block Trump's tariffs on Canadian products, which is the most public break we've seen from Trump from Republicans since the start of the new administration. 4 Republicans crossed party lines to join Democrats, including Mitch McConnell, the former Republican leader, Rand Paul, Suzanne Collins, and Lisa McCroskey, which are 2 frequent critics of Trump that have been speaking out in critical moments throughout the year. But this resolution is expected to go nowhere in the Republican-controlled House. On Thursday morning, financial markets were plummeting, with US futures showing that all 3 major indexes were expected to drop when the market opened. JP Morgan had a note that said that they increased their odds from a global recession from 40% to 60%. On Air Force One again, Trump spoke on the markets and said it's to be expected, and compared the terrible economy he inherited to a sick patient. Friday morning, China announced it was retaliating and was putting a 34% tariff on all goods imported from the US on April 10th. US stocks had their biggest drop since COVID in 2020. Right now, people are warning not to make any panic decisions like selling their investments too early. Best Buy says they source about 55% of their products from China, and it's estimated that Apple makes most of their phones there. Nike made half of their footwear in Vietnam last year, where Adidas also shared the largest source of their goods. Wayfair says that its furniture comes from China and 5 other Southeast Asian countries. Basic Fun, the toy company, also says that most of their products are made in China and that there are no factories in the US that can make what they sell. Things from Shein and Temu are probably going to get more expensive as well. If you're already planning on buying something big, now might be the time. Just be careful not to panic spy. Now on to general government news. Over the weekend, we heard Trump refusing to rule out a third term in office, according to an interview with NBC, even though he's not allowed to by the Constitution, which he's previously joked about in rallies before. He suggested that there are methods in which would allow him to run again. On Monday, lawmakers reacted to Trump's third term, saying that he's just joking. Most Republicans on Capitol Hill said that they have no appetite to change the Constitution, and there are no proposals in the works yet to make it happen. But there's one Republican taking it seriously. Ogles, a member of the House Freedom Caucus, introduced a resolution that would allow only Trump to serve a third term. In that same interview over the weekend, Trump added that he continues to back National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth after the Yemen attack scandal last week. He said he didn't get a resignation letter from Waltz and he doesn't need to. Caroline Waltz said that as far as the White House is concerned, that matter's closed. On Sunday, we saw Elon Musk handing out $2 million checks backing the conservative candidate Brad Schimmel at a rally in Wisconsin ahead of the Supreme Court election against Susan Crawford. Musk and his associated groups have spent somewhere in the range of $20 million on the race, putting the race in the national spotlight. Musk said this is one of those things that he thinks will affect the entire destiny of humanity. The race became the most expensive Supreme Court campaign in history, with over $80 million in spending by candidates and outside groups. Susan Crawford reacted to this, saying that she never expected to be fighting the richest man in the world for justice in Wisconsin. The Democratic National Committee filed a lawsuit against Trump's order to require voters to prove citizenship and a return deadline for mail-in ballots because he's in over his power and he's infringing on Congress's rights, specifically in violation of the Privacy Act. This being another way in how Democratic leadership in Congress can stand up to Trump. On Tuesday night, we saw Susan Crawford win the race, allowing liberals to maintain their narrow majority in the court. Senator Cory Booker again broke the record for the longest Senate speech in U.S. history after speaking for 25 hours and 4 minutes on Tuesday. The record previously belonged to Strom Thurmond, who spoke for 24 hours and 19 minutes in 1957 to delay the Civil Rights Act. Booker had no bathroom breaks throughout his entire speech. He stopped eating on Friday and stopped drinking water Sunday night. Booker told reporters that he was aware of Thurmond's record and felt that it was a strange shadow to hold over the institution. Republicans also sank House Speaker Mike Johnson's effort to kill a plan that would allow remote voting for lawmakers that become new parents. In Florida, Republicans maintained their 2 seats in the House of Representatives that previously belonged to Matt Gaetz and Mike Waltz on Wednesday. A Senate Republican budget plan was unveiled that would allow for new tax cuts on top of making Trump's 2017 tax cuts permanent. It's just a blueprint, but it's the first step needed in order to pass it, which was on the Senate floor on Friday and got approved. On Thursday, Dr. Mehmet Oz was confirmed the administrator for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Dr. Oz is a former heart surgeon and TV pitchman who's going to be managing health insurance programs for nearly half of the country. Boeing CEO Kelly Oberg was grilled on Capitol Hill on Wednesday, acknowledging that the company has made serious missteps when it's come to manufacturing in recent years. He said Boeing's made changes to the people, processes, and overall structure of the company. This hearing coming after the Federal Aviation Administration putting a monthly cap on the production of 737 MAX planes after a door plug blew in the middle of an Alaskan Airlines flight last year. We've seen Trump fire 3 members of his National Security Council this week after his meeting with Laura Loomer, a far-right activist. Air Force General Timothy Hawk and his deputy were dismissed from the roles in the National Security Agency, the nation's chief cyber intelligence and electronic eavesdropping agency. The White House offered no explanation for why they were removed, but we've heard Loomer raise complaints with Trump about the staffing in his administration. On Air Force One, Trump said that Loomer is a good patriot and that she recommended certain people for jobs. When asked if she had anything to do with the firings, Trump said no. On Thursday, we saw a memo announcing that General Inspector Steven Stebbins will be investigating Pete Hegseth after the Signal leak last week. He's going to be looking at Hegseth's conduct and commentary to see if it complies with rules on classification and keeping relevant information secret during military operations. Now onto immigration. Last week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the State Department revoked more than 300 student visas and intends on continuing doing so. Last week, 2 doctoral students were arrested and sent to a South Louisiana ICE processing center. On Tuesday, U.S. District Judge Michael Fabiars denied the government's motion to dismiss his petition, saying that he has jurisdiction because Mahmoud Khalil, another student who was arrested by ICE, was in New Jersey when the petition was filed. Khalil's attorney was happy by the decision because sometimes it's hard for the lawyers to know where to look for their client's release, since detainees often get moved around the country. On Friday, a federal judge ordered the administration to return Kilmar Garcia, who was accidentally sent to El Salvador. Garcia left the country due to gang violence and has been living in Maryland since 2011. Judge Paul Azinas ruled that the government must return Garcia by April 7th. Garcia's wife identified him through one of the videos shared of the prisoners in El Salvador. Now, onto global news. On Sunday on Air Force One, Trump said that he's very angry and pissed off at Russian President Vladimir Putin for how he's handling the ceasefire with Ukraine, saying he would impose secondary tariffs on Russian oil if he feels that Moscow is delaying the deal. Trump said that Putin says that Zelensky's not credible, but he's supposed to be making a deal with him whether he likes him or not. On Friday, there was a Russian missile attack in Zelensky's home city that killed 19 people, including 9 children. Zelensky criticized Bridget Pink, the US ambassador in Ukraine, after she wrote about the strike on X but didn't include Russia in the message. He said that the US is afraid to use the word Russian and that it was a weak response. Marco Rubio said that he met with a Russian envoy this week and he sent him back to Moscow after telling him that The clock is ticking, and there needs to be a breakthrough on the peace talks soon. Over the weekend, Trump said if the Iranians don't make a deal, there's going to be bombs like they've never seen before, after they rejected his offer for direct negotiations. Trump gave them a 2-month deadline before starting military strikes, which the US has never done before. But Iran said they would attack our base if the US takes military action against them. On Sunday, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei called for the destruction of Israel. There was an Israeli strike on a school in northern Gaza that was serving as a shelter for displaced families that killed 27 Palestinians and wounded dozens more. It's been a month since Israel's closed all of Gaza's crossings for goods. Markets are almost out of fresh veggies, and hospitals are rationing antibiotics and painkillers. This has been the longest blockade in the war yet. Israel said it was blocking the crossings because Hamas refused to extend the first phase of the ceasefire deal and release the hostages. But Hamas wants to move on to the second phase of the original agreement, which would release the hostages and end the war. On March 23rd, 15 emergency workers were killed in Gaza after Israel says that the troops opened fire because the convoy approached suspiciously without headlights or flashing lights. But footage was released from one of the workers' phones that the lights were in fact on. When asked about the killings, State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce said that everything that happens in Gaza is because of Hamas.